Speaking of the word vernacular, Becker says that it includes the everyday without excluding those special, unusual or historic occasions that people use their own image-making devices to capture. She goes on to say that the vernacular builds on tradition and at the same time breaks new ground, often drawing on forms of popular and public culture, both visual and non-visual, and that it represents the experience of the normal person closely tied to the photographer's lived experience. It's a natural step to discuss my current work from the perspective of found vernacular photography. In this presentation, I will discuss contextualization of the work, collaborations and working relationships, and then finally, the presentation, dissemination and future plans for my work. Rooted in found photography, my vernacular-inspired work combines reality with fiction, bringing lost stories into the present day. My work in progress is presented in 3 sections. Firstly, a video of my book dummy. This is a mix of original photos from the album and images that I have taken, as well as memorabilia, research transcripts, archival records, and a table of contents. Secondly, a series of 16 images, all of which show the original album either as a whole or as a close-up of part of a page. The third section is another video, this time of the original album as I received it. Putting the 3 together allows for different presentations of my work, which I will return to later. Some of my early photos taken in this module were shot through holes in the album pages as I tried to imagine what might have been there. Later images were shot on a macro lens to magnify the tears. Some early experiments were reshot to allow for a more unified approach. French photographer Christopher Agu uses the word maquette to describe his methodology and talks about it being the heartbeat of the work. This use of a sketch or model was central to my work, making 2 book dummies and using the first as a model. Initially, I envisaged the book dummy being in chapters formed by original photographs, still life, self-portrait, collaboration and memorabilia. As I started editing, I realised that this didn't suit the work, but mixing it up allowed for an unfolding narrative, which was the aim of the book. Other practitioners who've inspired me include Sophie Kell and Trish Morrissey, both of whom I refer to in my Surfaces and Strategies presentation. Others include Philip Toledano, Irina Werning, Sarah Davidman, Erez Israel, and Joan Fontcuberta, all of whom I have written about in my CRJ. For the first time, I set up a mini home studio with constant lighting and positioned still images at a uniform distance from the camera with the same white background. However, even though the lighting used was the same for all of them, there are some discrepancies in background colour. Recognising that this needs improvement, I will work on my understanding of the use of white balance before the start of my final major project. Glenn Williamson remarks, "At the moment of creation, the photo album is a personal artefact, a record of people and events that are rich with biography and personal memory, clearly marked by the traces of their owners and their practices. So true is this of the found album, but inevitably my own personal memories and traces have now become inextricably linked to them. It's impossible to separate the original owner's traces now with my own, as I reinvented and imagined events, stepping into shoes that were not my own." Vicky Forrest's guest lecture inspired me to consider more carefully the layout of photo books. New to me was the idea of a photo essay. Instead of this, I used a video of my photo book, setting out the narrative before looking in more detail at some of the images in the middle section. Some of the images I have taken represent objects that might have had been typical of the time period. My interest in the album required a personal moral code to do it justice and portray its narrative in an ethical fashion. The props I acquired were from as close to the 1920s as possible. Seeing traces of stories inspired me to bring them to a platform where others can see them. Much of my work is about detail. Close-up work of paper helps to understand the impact of action, brutality inflicted on memory, the loss of traces, and the subsequent making of new ones. Ideally, having some of these images of ripped paper on a larger scale will invite the viewer to examine this conflict more closely and notice how new aesthetics have come out of it. I've always been interested in family history and am fascinated by the reasons so many items once treasured later end up in auctions or house clearance sales. I've been interested in the writing of Elizabeth Edwards as she discusses the photograph as an object and how they exist materially in the world. This particular story belongs to a man called Jimmy and his friends, and then later his wife, as young adults in the 1920s. This album as an object leads me to assume that they were a wealthy couple and well-travelled and sociable at least up until the birth of a boy in 1930, which is where the story ends. Some of the photographs have been removed, tearing the pages in the process. Perhaps they were taken by a relative as a memento. I'd like to know how and why they chose some photographs over others. It is these gaps and other unknown factors which have sparked my interest and laid the foundations for this work. The physical condition of the object, the dirt and the damage, is evidence of its other lives, says Sassoon. To help me understand more about Jimmy's travels, I tried to make contact with some of the places included in the album. British Pathé were unable to shed any light on the inclusion of Lyle Street Pathé Studios, not knowing that there had been Pathé offices in that location. I also contacted Monte Carlo casinos but did not receive a reply. I did manage to get a photo of today's Pathé office though, which is included in my book dummy. I had discussions with a friend who is an amateur genealogy researcher and historian, and she was able to confirm some factual content. Other photographs need further investigation, something that time has not allowed for so far. However, presently I am considering learning about genealogy research methods so that I can use them in future work. Examples of our collaborative research can be read about in both my book dummy and in my CRJ. Finding participant responses to postcards I made in the previous module, I decided to use a similar method. I used a quote from the genealogist as a title. Initially, she had thought that the wedding date in the album was incorrect, as the guests were wearing big coats for July. As it happened, the date turned out to be correct, but the title stuck. Another collaboration was by way of sourcing images of Monte Carlo, Foy and Barry Island on Instagram, finding photographs that I wanted to incorporate in my work and getting the photographer's permissions to incorporate them. Some of the work's narrative is a juxtaposition of research and imagination. Purchasing props to include in the work, such as the medal awarded to W.S. Wood, was a first step. There is a photograph in the album with the text, Wood, RAF Gould, Yorkshire, 1919. Initially, I'd hoped for my work to be presented in a photo box, which would have included some of the original images and text, photographs of the album itself, present-day still-life photos, self-portraits, memorabilia, transcripts of research communications, and an inventory. I anticipated filming the original photo box album with its pages being turned and including this a memory stick within the box. I would have liked to film someone looking through the contents of the box, which would also have included a book dummy. Unfortunately, time did not allow for all of these projects, but I did manage to do some of them successfully. I see the end product for this work as two separate entities. Firstly, as a commissioned handmade photo book or photo box made for clients or families who would like their family album preserved in a bespoke way. Having options over design, format and price would appeal to a wider client base. Secondly, exhibiting larger works in gallery spaces, such as the ones which form the middle section in my portfolio. This would appeal to an art audience, and limited edition prints of work would be sold. In my CRJ, I uploaded an extract of home projection. Being able to project my work in public places at a locale referencing found photographs is another idea I'm considering. If I continue to include family research in my work, I'll either have to learn how to do it at a higher level or work in collaboration with a professional. This would be an option for the customer and would result in a higher cost product. It's been my intention to investigate potential for including such a project based around Coventry as it becomes City of Culture 2021. To start the ball rolling, I've subscribed to the City of Culture 2021 newsletter to enable me to find out what's already happening and planned there. Also, I have a good number of friends and relations in America who always seem to be fascinated by British history. As I visit at least once a year now, I have started to look for potential places I could approach with a view to showing my work. Finally, I anticipate entering a number of competitions now, particularly those that showcase applicants' work on social media platforms such as Instagram.